flying in like Superman, Grant.
That's all right. So I've literally not moved all day, and I'm also injured, so I can't run either, which is a massive frustration of mine.
Oh no, there's nothing worse than an injury preventing you from getting out there. And so thank you for swooping in, albeit an injured superhero. So you're going to do your session now on being prepared to teach PE and primary trainees, which I think is going to be really useful for subject leads and for any head senior leaders in school. So thank you for joining us today. We're not having much luck with the questions, as in there's not many coming through. So if you want to present it as like a delivered session, that would be great.
Okay, sure. Do you want me to, are you happy for me to share my screen?
Yeah, definitely. I'll mute myself and Karen or Penny will put you through.
Welcome everyone. This is a talk about a research study that I carried out started it back in 2019, I suppose, and then kind of carried it out during 2020, and it wasn't published until 2021. So I was looking at how prepared postgraduate primary pre-service teachers feel towards delivering physical education as they approach their NQT year. So my name's Grant Huddleston. I'm a course leader and a senior lecturer in physical education at Birmingham City University. And there is my Twitter handle in case you want to kind of see what I'm putting out there at times. So the whole idea of this presentation is to basically talk through the study that I did and kind of how it can impact the short term of physical education and potentially look at the long-term implications of physical education. So in regards to the indicators for this kind of Teach Meet, where I'm kind of aligning this presentation is kind of down the line of using the PE and sport premium for, you know, effective change, but more so, I suppose, the main topic, really, the main kind of golden thread throughout this presentation really is more to do with PE subject leadership in regards to support, guidance and advice for subject leads. Is my presentation still there?
No, it's come off screen. Have you stopped sharing?
Oh, I don't know what happened there. There you go. Is it back on?
Yes.
Sorry, I'm not sure what happened there.
That's all right.
I've actually using Teams for about 12, 13 months now, so that's the first time that's happened. Before I kind of get started and move into the intricacies of the actual study, I just want to kind of cover some key terminology. So a PPST, so if you see a PPST in the writing, or if I say that, I'm basically talking about a trainee, a primary trainee teacher. And what it stands for is a primary pre-service teacher. A pre-service teacher tends to be the term that's used in journal articles in regards to trainees. AOTT is an adult other than the teacher, and I'll explain in what context that means very soon. ITE I'm using as initial teacher education. I know the DFE and a lot of other people use ITT, which is basically the same thing, I suppose, but I'm calling it ITE. And then there are other acronyms that I use throughout, such as CPD and NQT, but I'm hoping the audience will understand and appreciate what those are already. The next term really is this idea of a generalist. So a generalist, in regards to the text, is a teacher who teaches all subject areas across the primary curriculum. So that is a qualified primary school teacher who's teaching all areas of the national curriculum. And then a bit later on, I'll talk about what a specialist and a coordinator are within the domain of physical education, and that does alter and change quite often across where it would depend on where you're looking and who it is you're asking. So before I kind of get started, I just want to kind of highlight the rationale behind why I've gone down this route. So the idea behind this study came simply from 3 different areas, really. It was discussions with my trainees that I was having in 2019 and prior to 2019, where they were kind of raising 2 key points, really. One, in relation to the fact that they didn't often feel prepared to teach physical education, and that was throughout the year of them being involved in initial teacher education, but also once they were finishing up the course and entering becoming a newly qualified teacher, they still had reservations about teaching aspects of PE. And then also the number of times they raised that they weren't having opportunities to teach PE when on placement. So being the PE lead within the team, I was always asking our trainees how much PE or what PE are they teaching when on placement. And one of the most common responses was, I haven't taught PE yet, or I've only kind of seen it happen. I haven't managed to kind of get involved in any PE yet. And then in addition to that, there was this notion of, seeing, when I go out and visit schools and seeing what's happening in schools, also what's taking place on social media with what people are saying in regards to delivery models of physical education in their schools. And also being involved in prior literature around the landscape of primary PE, and in particular for me, the use of the PE and school sport premium. And I've kind of left a quote in there regarding it takes a village to raise a child. And if you're part of our BCU partnership, it's a quote I use quite often with schools and teachers, is that training the teacher is about the whole partnership. It's about what takes place in the role of initial teacher education in regards to the modules they're doing, the delivery of those modules and the content of those modules, and also the placement. So, ITE isn't just about, from my perspective, the university, what's going on there, but it's also, what's taking place in schools and how that can help develop that trainee further and allow them opportunities to see what's going on and teach PE and apply their skills, really. So there are 4 key research questions from this study wrapped around experiences that the PE trainee had, the impact of outsourcing through the lens of a trainee teacher. So this is what they see as the benefits or drawbacks of outsourcing in primary schools. How prepared they feel in regards to teaching PE. And I've got either route there. And what I mean by either route is that this study looked at trainees on a generalist primary education route and a generalist plus additional PE modules route. What CPD needs they would like to kind of get involved in once they graduate. And from those 4 key research questions was then, what action could potentially be taken in the short term and both in the long term to help better prepare our trainees and better prepare them for becoming a newly qualified teacher. So the next few slides are basically just reviewing what literature is currently out there. And I've tried to be as brief as possible, really. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on what literature is currently out there, because I want to kind of get into the nuts and bolts of the findings of the study. So the traditions of primary PE is generally that it promotes a topic or thematic approach, and that it is generalist teachers or the class teacher that then delivers all aspects of the primary national curriculum. There are kind of two articles or 2 studies I wanted to kind of draw out from the literature review of this part. Was related to the study from 2016, where it said that 6% of primary school teachers are specialists in PE, which is, is a very small amount. And if I go back to the study of HMI in 1990, where they stated that 30% of lessons in primary were actually taught as single subjects, but it's unclear kind of what's taking place currently. I then kind of looked at why somebody would want to begin a career in primary education, and what it generally a lot of it comes down to. I looked at it from Lorte's themes, and there was 2 key themes that jumped out. The first one in regards to the continuation theme, and then the interpersonal theme. Now, the interpersonal theme tends to be the key theme to why someone would go into the career of primary education, because it's based on them wanting to support others, whereas the continuation theme tends to be something that aligns closer with secondary school teachers, that they're continuing their love of a subject, of a particular subject, towards teaching that subject. So based on that, it's very clear that, you know, a primary school teacher going down the interpersonal theme can have feelings or differing feelings towards different subject areas. However, it's encased around this notion of wanting to support others. A lot of these concepts are then based on the idea that every trainee, every single person going into teaching and being a teacher, will have their own institutional biography, their own, their views of what PE is about, based on what they've experienced themselves as a child, and based on the university and the course that they were on, when they were at university doing an undergraduate degree, and then if they carried on doing a postgraduate degree. Again, in the same study that I looked at earlier, 39% of the people involved in that study considered PE to be of limited to very limited importance within the school day and the school curriculum. So just to kind of cover the landscape of initial teacher education, generalist trainees receive anything up to 12 hours of PE specific training. So those that are going into the primary education generally receive around 12 hours of PE training. That figure has actually been seen as less by the Youth Sport Trust from a paper they looked at in 2017, where they said it was around 9 hours of specific PE training. So there are a number of professionals entering teaching who have had very few hours of PE content or PE, training in a university sports hall or wherever, it's on a field or whatnot. From that, trainees can then often choose an additional PE module, which then often gives them the mark of a specialist or a leader in that particular area. There was a study back in 2010 from Arjeska who stated that his argument was that core subjects of English and maths become the focus of the generalist teacher, whereas PE is more of a specialist subject. This notion of being prepared and this idea of subject knowledge. So in order for a trainee to be seen as prepared, they have to satisfy the teacher standards. However, the PE national curriculum is both vague and wide, and they have to develop both content knowledge and pedagogical knowledge, which is PCK, which I've talked about in this paper. So getting onto the notion of what a specialist and a coordinator is, for the sake of this study, because the literature is so vast and the literature differs constantly as to what a specialist is, for the purpose of this, a specialist is a teacher who holds qualified teacher status and who has received specific primary PE training through either additional CPD or through the means of ITE. Whereas a coordinator is a teacher, again, with QTS and has responsibility for the management of PE in school. And it's worth noting that a coordinator isn't necessarily always a specialist. But obviously, if you're running a coordinator role in the school, you would arguably be more effective to have a specialist coordinator in place that has actual PE specific training. Who is currently teaching PE in the primary schools? It's generally three main providers at the moment. You've got the generalist teacher, the class teacher, a specialist PE teacher, and that can be a specialist primary teacher, or in some cases, especially with some academies, it's a secondary PE teacher who is teaching across the key stages, from key stage 1 to key stage 4, and then AOTTs, which we talked about earlier, who in most cases are coaches, but also can be the teaching assistant, for example. So an additional other than the teacher, an adult other than the teacher. And that ratio of who's teaching the lessons has altered over the past 8 years or so of the PE and sport premium being released, really. From a 2016 study by Randall et al., there was 33% of those that delivered PE didn't hold qualified teacher status. there hasn't really been a study since looking into there's been a few studies since by Griggs, but not many studies really looking into how many deliverers of PE are currently holding qualified teacher status. So that's something that, you know, is a further area that requires more research as to the effectiveness of PE being delivered by people that don't hold qualified teacher status. If I just kind of finish with the confidence and competence of teaching staff, it's varied and usually contextual to the school. You know, some schools will have a lot of confidence, some schools won't, and that is what's catalysed the promotion of outsourcing the delivery of PE to coaching companies in a lot of cases, and also other factors regarding outsourcing is how much PE is valued within that school. But like I said before, it's very limited in the research basis in regards to the benefit of employing coaches in the place of teachers. There's not much research at the moment that states whether it is beneficial or if it's not beneficial. The general consensus is, you know, that they're there to help support the teaching staff in regards to their subject knowledge and motivation, and can raise the aspirations, confidence and competence of teaching staff there. However, the drawbacks from what limited research is out there at the moment states that, you know, a lot of coaches that are being outsourced don't have an education background. They can often promote sporting goals over education goals. Their knowledge of the national curriculum and pupils questions have been raised about their understanding of the national curriculum. So, and also relating to that is what impact that has on teachers that are, you know, are training in physical education, especially those that are on placement. Which brings me into the study that I then carried out. So I gained ethical clearance in February 2020, and data collection took place between May and July 2020. Now, obviously, we had the COVID pandemic that was kind of starting out just before then. So for me, I'm gaining quite a few grey hairs at that moment. So based on the pandemic and the fact that schools were closing in a face-to-face format, it was estimated that trainees completed around 75 days face-to-face in school by that point, and that had an error deviation of plus or minus 10 days. The people taking part in the study, there were 48 trainees taking part in the study, and they completed a mixed methods questionnaire, and they were from 6 universities from around the country. So we had universities from the north of the country, the south of the country, and in the Midlands as well, to kind of give a general consensus of what's taking place. And the theory behind the answers, the responses, were analysed using something called grounded theory. So the findings were, I'll be breaking down across the research questions, so experiences, outsourcing, preparedness that I've decided to use, and then continual professional development. Where I've used code such as NPE or PE, that's just code for that trainee that took part in the study. So findings from experiences. The first question I asked trainees were what experience they had of teaching or observing PE prior to starting their course. And again, I asked this against PE trainees and non-PE trainees, and the general consensus or the mean answer was that the majority had taught 0 hours of PE at 54%, whereas the mean score for observing was that 39% had observed 1 to 5 hours, and then you know, there was a lot more of them that had observed a bit more of that amount. Okay, but in total, you know, 24% of the trainees had observed no PE whatsoever. On completion of their postgraduate course, and then obviously getting ready to start their NQT year, and this is potentially where, for me, this is where the findings are the most worrying. 17% of trainees had taught no PE whatsoever during their time in a placement school, and also of those trainees, 2% of the trainees had actually also not observed any PE either. which for me is a really worrying piece of data, because if you were moving into your NQT year and you know that you've taught and observed no PE whatsoever for the entire time, and then you're then having to teach PE, you know, obviously for that teacher, that's going to place a huge strain on them professionally, and also what impact will that have to the pupils as well. So the mean scores there were that teaching and observing PE was at between 1 to 5 hours of teaching and observing physical education whilst on placement. In regards to the findings to outsourcing or the use of outsourcing, generally speaking, the trainees felt that outsourcing the curriculum to coaches was beneficial to pupils, with just over 70% of the trainees feeling that it was beneficial to the pupils versus to just less than 10% to being not beneficial. In regards to being beneficial to the teachers, this is where the figure drops down considerably, and it was more of them were kind of sat on the fence as to whether it was beneficial to the teachers or not beneficial to the teachers, with 50% saying yes and 38% saying they didn't feel that it was beneficial to teachers. Now, at the moment, this doesn't really give you any kind of reasons behind that. So I then kind of explored why they felt that way. So the next set of questions, this is where we kind of grounded the answers to specific terms or specific themes. And the biggest theme for outsourcing or it being beneficial was that the coach was seen as an expert. The second most popular theme was that it created teacher time using PPA, which, interestingly, if it's being used for the PE and sport premium, that shouldn't be the case. And then the teacher being able to observe the coach was seen as beneficial. So they were the three top answers for their responses to outsourcing. Some of the actual written, these are the written responses from the trainee. You know, it allows pupils to have a fully trained person teaching in a specific field who is able to support a range of learning styles, they've said, and a thorough knowledge of primary PE standards. It's often seen as extra PPA time for teachers. PPA time will be useful for me to plan my lessons. I don't feel as important a subject as the responsibilities deployed to a level 2 sports coach. So these were 4 of the answers that were given in regards to the data on this slide here. In regards to their feelings of being prepared, there was 26 themed responses here. So the responses they gave were open, and they were then grounded to a particular theme. But the major theme to being prepared was this idea of they needed strong subject knowledge. In regards to the kind of their ability to do different things, their ability to use technology was their weakest area, with just over 40% of them stating that they felt they had good or excellent knowledge of using technology within PE. Whereas planning, the ability to plan for PE lessons, was their strongest area. In regards to the areas of the national curriculum, and I included swimming in this, even though swimming is not a specific area of the PE national curriculum, but the primary curriculum as a whole, only 40% of trainees felt confident to teach swimming once they started out as an NQT. And this was a massive, massive deficit in regards to the poor and very poor, where, you know, of those that said they wouldn't be, you know, 46% of them felt that they had poor or very poor understanding of teaching swimming. Games was by far the highest area that they felt prepared to teach, with the majority of them stating that they felt prepared. And then the rest of the areas were kind of roughly within a 10% difference, with dance and gymnastics kind of being the slightly lower areas. The reason for these responses was generally from the trainees' responses, was that they weren't gaining experience or opportunity to teach these areas, which was why they stated that they felt that they didn't feel confident teaching these areas. And then the final part of my study was then asking them about continual professional development and areas that they would want to develop in as an NQT. And kind of not surprisingly, which supported their idea of being prepared, was that being able to assess somebody in PE and their idea of using technology in PE were the two areas that they felt most needed for them to develop as an NQT, whereas planning, then closely followed by pedagogy and subject knowledge, were the next kind of the ones that they felt less need to develop. Now, one thing to kind of promote quickly, just before kind of a move on to the next set of CPD results, is this notion of the Dunningkruger effect. So the idea with confidence that somebody can be very confident in a particular area and not know very much, but as you know more in a field, you slowly become less confident in it because you're aware of what's involved in that subject and what's involved in that theme or area or topic. So some of the explanations to some of the concepts that I'm talking about here are kind of explained by this Dunning-Kruger effect. Because one of the interesting responses in this study was that overall the non-PE trainees felt better prepared to teach PE than the PE trainees who had roughly an additional 36 hours of contact time at university. So this is a big part to play in some of the responses here. Secondly, the responses are through the eyes of a trainee and not from an academic's point of view or a teacher's point of view or a coach's point of view. So finally, in regards to CPD, I asked the question of how they felt they would likely carry out their CPD. And the vast majority stated that they're likely to just observe teachers or observe coaches in school, and that's how they would professionally develop. And then, interestingly, it kind of gave almost an ideal linear line down. So, and this was what I found the most interesting, was that they felt that social media, the use of social media, would be the least likely form of CPD in order for them to professionally develop in physical education. So this for me was quite an interesting finding, because I would have felt that social media was slightly higher up than this. So I've just kind of summarized the findings there, which I won't talk through because I've kind of went through them, but they're on the presentation, which I can share with the TeachMeet. Now, what does all that mean? So the feeling of being prepared, whilst it's mixed and it's very contextual to where in the country that trainee studied and what they've experienced, generally they had very limited opportunities, with the majority of them receiving anywhere between 1 to 5 hours of teaching PE. And there's lots of research over the past 8 years that shows that the PES premium has had a massive impact on the workforce in schools. And that therefore has had a big impact on how prepared trainees are as they start their NQT year. So really what I've kind of tried to finish this presentation on really is what changes could be changed in the short term and what could be looked at in the long term, over the next 5 years, maybe over the next 10 years. So in the short term, for me, the delivery of PE needs to become the sole domain of a teacher with QTS. And whilst that's kind of highlighted in the APPG report of 2019, the reasons for me stating that are several-fold, really. A teacher will look at things from an education perspective, where a coach doesn't necessarily always look at things from an education perspective. And secondly, having QTS is almost kind of like a driving license. If you've got QTS, then you know what they've completed. They've completed teacher training. They've completed a successful placement. So you've kind of got a baseline level of where they are at with their standard of teaching, and then you look at developing that level of teaching through numerous different avenues. So for me, I think the sole PE as a national curriculum subject, and all national curriculum subjects, should be taught by a teacher that holds qualified teacher status. Secondly, schools try to provide as many varied experiences in PE for the trainee whilst on placement, and also not just varied experiences, but more experiences. So with the majority receiving between 1 to 5 hours of teaching PE, it's no wonder why trainees aren't feeling overly prepared at the moment. So, I'd really push for schools to start trying to get trainees to get involved in all areas of the PE national curriculum. both with team teaching, teaching episodes, and also teaching on their own, but also, you know, teaching more hours of PE. Trainees to address their use of technology, and also this concept of something called TPAC, which is somebody's technological, pedagogical content knowledge, where they're developing not only their content knowledge and their pedagogical knowledge, but they're how to incorporate technology effectively. And then finally, within the ITE experience is to again promote additional activity areas outside of games, because games is very high, but again the likes of swimming, gymnastics and dance are relatively much lower. And then finally, it's kind of that the long-term implications and potential changes are, you know, whilst I'm fully aware that it's entirely specific and contextual to the school staff and its values or philosophy or ideology of what PE is, I would really kind of press home that schools need to consider their model of delivery of physical education in the school and consider what input and how that input is used for adults other than teachers, and what that impact is, and can you measure that impact? How successful is the generalist plus coordinator model in your school, or would a specialist model work better, which I'll talk about on the next few slides. And then finally, it's whether PE continues to be 2 hours a week, or wherever that changes. And you know, the AFPE health paper from last year looks at trying to promote the idea of 5 hours of PE a week. So I've kind of finished with 2 delivery models. The first model, and these are kind of just really conceptual really at this moment in time. The first one is that PE is taught by a specialist, and on the final few pages I've kind of explained what a specialist is, as a national curriculum subject. But then the specialists and adults other than teachers are then used to help promote extracurricular and school sport, and also help promote physical activity and wellbeing initiatives across the school. Whereas the delivery model B, again, is very similar, that qualified teacher status is delivering physical education, but this time, instead of a specialist delivering physical education, it's a coordinator that manages the delivery of PE, and it's taught by the generalist teachers, the class teachers of that particular class. And again, AOTTs, coordinators and the generalists are used to help promote extracurricular and school sport, and help to promote physical activity and wellbeing initiatives across the school. I have kind of summed these up on the next few slides with how they would be delivered and the considerations, drawbacks and caveats of using that particular model, but I'll kind of I'll leave that in the slides for now, and that's something that can be looked at. There is the full paper that can be read, that's left within the PE Scholar page if you want to access the full paper. But for me now, I'd just like to say thank you for listening, and whether you have any questions or would like to raise anything. Thank you.
Thanks, Grant. Those statistics were both fascinating and shocking at the same time. It's absolutely staggering to hear that so many trainees entering the profession feel not necessarily underprepared, but that they will require quite a hefty dollop of support in those first few months. And I think that equipping the subject leaders to support colleagues in that is absolutely key, like you say. You know, the early career framework.
Yeah.
Have you had a look at that through the lens of PE?
I haven't in detail yet. It is, the early career framework is mentioned in the full paper. So if you do, yeah. I'm not. Every response to the question won't be go and read the full paper. But there is a paragraph in there in regards to the early career framework. Yeah. I mean, the issue from a PE perspective and the early career framework is, you know, to be a primary teacher is so wide, isn't it? There's so many different facets to primary education. So, you know, do they hone in specifically on PE specific training when there are so many other things going on as well? So that for me is something that really needs extra research and additional looking at, really, because there isn't much out there at the moment in regards to PE and the early career framework?
I only asked that because you probably, I don't know whether you can see me, I'm never more than about 2 feet away from my copy of the ECF. And I was just thinking, oh, I wonder if he's done anything with ECF for PE. Because there's been some discussion about the ECF being quite secondary heavy. So I didn't know whether you'd had a look at it through a primary lens and then obviously through a primary PE lens. Oh, somebody's just said, is there any way we can access this research?
Yeah, so the full paper is on the link, which I can send over this presentation to you soon. Actually, I realised I haven't sent it to you, have I? But it's on the PE Scholar website. I've also written up shortened, abbreviated articles, which hopefully should be published over the next kind of 6 months as well. To access the full paper is on the PE Scholar website. Okay,
that's brilliant. And anybody can get open access to that. They can just That's brilliant. So as I know, saying before, the question came in about the early career framework. It's not a criticism of it, but there's been some discussion about it being quite secondary heavy. So it'd be interesting to have a look at it through a primary lens and then also through a primary PE lens, to see what materials or what aspects of it schools might need to supplement their provision with, because obviously with the rollout come September, for everybody to have to kind of align their practice with it, it'd be nice to kind of have a little side thing to say, and PE needs to go with this.
Yeah, I mean, with research, I mean, the great thing about research is that it doesn't generally always create answers; it creates more questions. So, you know, for me, the early career framework is a big area that requires more research as to how primary PE can then align with that, and what could be done in that aspect. I mean, what I think for me at the moment, it's what is physical education is a big question, and I think a lot of people envisage PE differently from one school to the next and one county to the next, and then based on what you envisage as PE, is then kind of what outcomes do you want from that PE. And I know in the last 12 months, PE has changed quite considerably. The fact that we've moved into, you know, lockdown and we've had home learning, and you've got this notion of health moving into fitness, and then fitness moving back into health again, and yeah, PE. I could talk all day here. Sorry.
Knock yourself out, Grant. Feel free. You're amongst friends. But I do think as well that it's going to be so important for early career teachers to have a real handle on PE and activity, especially as we were talking to Youth Sport Trust earlier in the week, and they were saying about only 20% of children meeting the movement targets recommended daily movement targets. So actually having early career teachers who are really well versed or well supported in encouraging children to move is going to be a really key factor moving forward.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things I'm really trying to push home with this research is that I'm not anti-coach. I'm not anti-coach whatsoever. I was a growing up. I was a coach, I think coaches have a real important part to play, and that's why I think for me, I think to build this movement time, I think coaches can play a really important part in promoting physical activity and movement throughout the school day, and also initiatives to get to school and to get home from school and after school. But for me, the national curriculum for me is a QTS area for every subject, not just PE.
And if you think about the broader offer in terms of primary practice as well, there are so many missed opportunities for making links across the curriculum if you are not the person delivering and designing and delivering that PE curriculum. Because I know in my practice there would be so many things that we did in science or in writing, for writing about journalism and events that we've taken part in as a class, science experiments about heart rate and muscles and the body, and if you're not directly involved with the delivery of that PE curriculum, you can't make those links in such a meaningful way, can you? So there's
absolutely. I mean it, like I said before, it is so contextual to the school, because I know this is a bit ad hoc, but I mean, I've visited schools and spoken to head teachers and deputy head teachers, and they've said, none of our staff want to teach it. And then if you've got that, what do you do at that point? So and that's why that's why there are schools that are, they bring in one person and they're the sole deliverer. And it's evaluating it, isn't it? There are positives of that, and there are obvious drawbacks to that as well.
Yeah, definitely. Any excuse for me to teach PE? I loved it. But the only thing, I was equipped with the knowledge because I went to a university. I did a 4-year course, and although it was a science specialism, it was a specialist PE site. So we did an awful lot of initial teacher training within PE within that 4 years, even though we weren't kind of PE specialists. So I had a coaching background as well, so I went into it feeling quite well equipped and confident. But I recognise that obviously lots of other colleagues are entering that profession feeling not at all like that.
Can I jump in as my experience? I do see that, but it is so school specific. I would say if you came into Batchley, it was that any ITT we had with us had to teach PE. That was the expectation, and actually that I think probably 20%, 25% of my staff were PE trained. It was just that culture. If you go into a lesson, you would show them the structure and ideas. I like that. That was really good. Have you ever thought about grouping the children like this? And that kind of constant pedagogy, but just drip, drip, drip all the time, like it was in any lesson. PE was something that it just ran through the school. But what I would say is, the way we made it high profile and got all the staff involved was dance, and used that through, and again through topic. And we helped, in terms of confidence. We said, right, we're going to put on a show at the local theatre. Every class is going to do a dance. Right, we'll scaffold it for you. We'll build it for you. But that gave all the staff a confidence. And we very much differentiated what was class-based and what was, teacher. I do, I think you can have non-QTS people who can bring a lot, not necessarily coaching, but internal. I had a TA who was, an excellent PE teacher. She just didn't want to go for QTS.
I think it's that blend, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's culture, confidence, qualification. It's that kind of three that you really need. You need the culture in your school to develop the confidence, and then you need qualified professionals in whatever area to support the real expert development of that. So thank you so much.
Emma, sorry to interrupt. You've got a question.
Oh, right, hang on. Oh, yeah. A comment about coaches supplementing PE teaching rather than replacing the generalist teacher. Definitely. There's so many aspects. It's like anything in a school. If you've got specialist people to support the delivery of a quality curriculum, that's absolutely brilliant. So I'm going to leave it there, Jen.